Great. All right, so we're going to shift our gear from a clinical medicine that is serious in nature to a athletic performance or sports science that is more amusing, more enjoyable. So the topics that I'm going to talk about today is this, ergogenic aids. It sounds very sexy and it's very interesting, but what it is that ergogenic aids include all measures or all means to enhance athletic performance. So it could include warm-up, or it could include growth hormones and those doping and so on and so forth. And at the University of Texas at Austin that I'm at, we do have one semester long course ergogenic aids. So it is a very big issue in our area. But it turns out all the ergogenic aids that athletes use, most of them came from a clinical use. As you know, the growth hormones and testosterone are FDA approved clinical use. And the breathe right that some athletes use is developed for obstructive sleep apnea. And EPO, as you know, it's a great medicine for anemia. And believe it or not, some athletes use Viagra for the performance enhancing drug. And the compression sleeve in these days is developed for deep vein thrombosis. As I said, a lot of them came from clinical use here. Let me show you one of the best examples of a ergogenic aid that works on the elite athletes. That is blood doping. You've heard a lot about blood doping in relation to a Lance Armstrong and Tour de France cyclists. And if you look at these highly trained elite runners, if you're familiar with VO2 max, their VO2 max is 80 mils per kilogram per minute. It's some of the highest VO2 max ever reported in humans. Yet, after they go through a blood doping, so they reinfused their own blood 2 weeks later, you can see those extremely high VO2 max was further increased to 84, and they kept elevated more than 2 weeks later. And if you look at a running time to exhaustion, it's a similar deal. You can see substantial improvement the blood doping can induce. And I don't know if you watched a Tour de France this year. In the Tour de France, they climb up those French Alps from the bottom to the high up in the mountains. It's category 1 climb that's really steep. If you look at this year's winning time, the fastest time going from bottom to top, and if you apply that to a Tour de France 10 years ago, he would have ended up 41st or 42nd. So you can kind of tell what kind of impact blood doping has on those athletes here. Some of the ergogenic aids don't work too well. This is one example. I don't know if you watch a NBA final this year. The San Antonio Spurs and the Miami Heat was in San Antonio, and the AC got broken down. It was really hot and humid, and LeBron James, the star of Miami Heat, got into heat exhaustion. And if you look at how he was wearing, you can see a compression garment all over the place. And if you think about in a hot, humid environment, evaporation is the only way that you can lose heat. And if you're covering yourself with those compression garments, you are putting yourself into dangerous situations. And sure enough, in the second game on, he took out and he did great. And the Miami Heat won the second game in the NBA final. Right? And some of the ergogenic aids were beneficial, and it's really old. And we really don't know if that effect is there. This is a blood from turtles. It's supposed to enhance circulations. It's supposed to enhance endurance. And this came from the thousands years of a Chinese traditional medicine here. And do you know what this is? This is actually a penis from deer and supposed to enhance recovery from the injury. So right before the Beijing Olympics, these are the very hot topics. And the International Olympic Committee didn't know what to do with it because there's no research to show that they are indeed performance enhancing. So in the last minute, they prohibited this, right? So that's really old ergogenic aids. So the newest ergogenic aid is this, ischemia perfusions. So if you really think about what it can do, it is easy to apply, it is convenient because the only thing you need is a blood pressure cuff, and it is inexpensive. And no side effect, and it is a physiological manipulation. So because of that, it is legal and ethical. And anti-doping agency is going to leave you alone on this. But the one thing that I want to keep remind you of is this. So if you look at the physiological functional spectrum going from abnormal to normal to supernormal right here, okay? So in the medicine and drugs, what we are trying to achieve is going from abnormal to normal. So there's lots of space that you can improve their function upon. What we are talking about in the ergogenic aids, we are going from high normal to supernormal. Obviously, there is a ceiling effect that you have to overcome. So the impact that you can induce with ergogenic aids would be very small. So when you look at some of the studies, if you are used to looking at clinical medicine results, it gets really depressing to some extent. So I'm just giving you a warning, all right? All right, so this area is fairly new. The very first study was published in 2010 right here. So what they did is to use young, healthy, well-trained subject, and they performed IPC, which has been shown here. They got a 5 minutes period. They went through the graded exercise test on the bicycle, time to exhaustion. What they found here is that they measured the VO2 max, or maximal oxygen consumption, which is the best index of your endurance capacity or aerobic endurance. So as you can see here, this is a control conditions, and this is a IPC conditions. You can see about 3% increase in the oxygen consumption with this technique. The one problem of this is that if you look at the studies after the original ones, this one, they got a control conditions, and they got a IPC conditions here. VO2 max didn't really improve in those conditions. And in this study, they also combined with some exercise so that if you accumulate more metabolite in the muscles, that effect could be larger. And that's why this condition is there, but it didn't make any difference. And more newer studies use treadmill VO2 max. It really didn't make any difference either. So the IPC didn't have a much effect on the VO2 max if you focus on more newer studies coming in this area. Then if you think about VO2 max or maximum oxygen consumption, it has an exact definition that's determined by Fick equations. So VO2 max equals to cardiac output and AVO2 difference. It's really hard to imagine that the IPC is going to enhance cardiac output, which is a primary determinant of VO2 max, at least in healthy populations. So because of this, now a lot of people focused on endurance or the exercise performance area. And this study looked at the effect of IPC on the 5-kilometer running time here. Right? What they found is that in the control conditions and control conditions and IPC conditions, you can see in the young, healthy, trained men, their value, their time got a increase by about 2.5%. All right? It is very small, but I'll tell you why this is actually important. And probably this is the most important study in this area. Why? Because they used elite athletes to address this question. So what they did is to recruit a Canadian national level swimmers aged from 13 to 27 years of age. And what they did is this. They did IPC, and they did a time trial. And in between, you have about 40 to 45 minutes warm up here. So for some reasons, IPC effect persisted quite long time after you get done with these conditions. And what you found here is that, well, 1% improvement in swimming time in elite level swimmers. And if I say that and show it to a clinical medical scientist, it's like, who cares? But again, this has a very important impact for the athletes, because what athletes are looking for is this very tiny edge on the top of this ceiling right here. Okay? Let me show you. So here's a Olympic marathon time in a gold medal to a bronze medal performance. And if you look at the difference here between gold and the silver, it is 0.5%. So the athletes are looking for very slight edge. And if you express it percent, it's very small. But if you're in a stadium, it is a difference of 270 yards. So that is, one person is finishing, the other person just getting into the stadium on the track. So it's a huge difference here. What about gold and the bronze? It's only 2.7% difference. What kind of distance is that? Well, 0.7 miles. It's a eternal difference that you can see. All right, I like to show this example because everybody remembers his performance. Usain Bolt in the Beijing Olympics. He won with a world record of 9.69. And everybody can't stop talking about how great he was, how dominating his performance was. And this is his time here, 9.69, all right? But if you look at the percent difference here, it's only about 2%. What about bronze? Well, 2.3%. So we are not looking at very small difference. All right. This is actually a great performance by Michael Phelps. I don't know if you remember this in the 100-meter butterfly. It was very tiny difference, and you can see Michael Phelps came nowhere. You can see how big of a difference that is at this point. Then Michael Phelps came in, and then he won the gold medals. And his performance here, 50.58, and the silver, the difference is 0.02%. And if you look at this entire race here, 8th place finish at 51.12. Nobody cares about his performance because it seems like a long time after Michael Phelps finished. But difference between gold and 8th place, last place is 2.5%. Okay? So it has a really big meaning in this. So the data that I have shown you so far deals with localized IPC application. So if you're doing cycling, they apply the cuffs on the thigh. If you're dealing with swimmers, they apply the cuff on the brachial arteries. What about remote IPC? Does that have any effect in here? Well, the very first study was published earlier this year. What they did is to place a blood pressure cuff in the lower limbs or thigh and performed IPC there. And outcome was a hand grip exercise. As you can see here, the time to fatigue during a hand grip exercise was improved with a remote ischemic conditioning. And if you look at any power output during the hand grip exercise, at any given point, the power was greater, showing the remote ischemic condition seems to be working. We also did this study using a Wingate anaerobic power test. And the Wingate test was developed by Wingate Institute in Israel. But what you do is you hop on the bike and start riding this bicycle here, no load. And as soon as a RPM or repetition maximum reach 150 RPM, we are going to drop this weight. And so all of a sudden it gets really tough. And you have to continue cranking up for about 30 seconds. It is very strenuous exercise protocol that some people puke, actually. And we decided to do it in 4 times so that we can mimic some sporting conditions like ice hockey, for example. So you have to go in, out, and go in and out. And what we found here is, the first Wingate test, their power output was significantly greater in a remote ischemic conditioning group, even though if you look at the second, third, and the fourth bouts, it didn't make any difference here. So the million-dollar question is, what would be the mechanism underlying those performance-enhancing effect of remote IPC? Well, one of the research that I found that's really interesting is this ex vivo study. and using a heart muscles. And what they did, or let me show you, in order to improve anaerobic performance, you have to improve some of the substrate in the muscles. For example, ATP or adenosine triphosphate or phosphocreatine. If you improve that, you can improve anaerobic performance. In this study here, the ATP concentration was not really affected by IPC. But the interesting thing is this: phosphocreatine or creatine phosphate content was substantially elevated after IPC conditions. And I'm sure that many of you have heard of this creatine that the athletes use. If you go to a sports nutrition or sports supplement shop, most of them do not work. But one of the products that has been consistently shown to be working is this creatine. What does creatine do? Well, it's to improve phosphocreatine content in the muscle. So this might be one of the mechanisms acting on IPC conditions. Well, this is a Dr. Botkar's study that he mentioned in here. That's really interesting. So let me quickly go through this. So as he explained, he subjected the subject either to a exercise or a IPC conditions. And let me show you these exercise conditions here. So basically what he did is to take out human plasma from those subjects and create a dialysate and put it in a perfused rabbit heart here. And outcome variable is a infarct size. And if you infuse a exercise perfusate here, you can see the infarct size is substantially reduced. Well, he did the same thing with IPCs, and the effect is really reproducible in this. So IPC appears to have an effect that is very closely mimics exercise. So that brings up a question: does a IPC repeated chronically, does that have exercise training effect? Well, that question has not been addressed in any of the studies that needs to be done here. Because so far I showed you a ischemic conditioning as an acute protocol or preconditioning effect. What about if you do it in the chronic conditions, and does it really improve? So one of the studies that's really interesting is this study from UK. So what they did is 8 weeks of repeated IPC in a healthy subject. So you can see the control conditions and IPC conditions. And if when you look at a cutaneous function measured by laser Doppler or local heating, they are supposed to reflect endothelium function in the skin. They didn't find any improvement in these. But when they looked at a brachial artery FMD, which is a measure of endothelium-dependent vasodilation here, you can see even in healthy men, the FMD was increased from 4.3 to 5.6 after 2 weeks, and then it kept elevated for about 8 weeks here. So it might have a possibility that the IPC repeated chronically might have exercise training effect. Well, when you think about that, it's really interesting when we can apply those ischemic conditioning to athletes. We could apply in the preconditioning like we've been talking about, or we could do it in the post-conditioning after exercise, or another way to do it during exercise. Well, in this context, interesting training modality that has become very popular is called Kaatsu training or blood flow restriction training. So the idea is that when you perform exercise, put the tourniquet on both arms and as well as legs. So by superimposing ischemic stimuli to exercise training program, your muscle hypertrophy and increase in the muscle strength are greater than without those tourniquet on. And you could even perform exercise at much lower intensities in shorter durations, and you can achieve a greater effect. So if that's the case, it would be interesting to combine IPC with exercise training and do it on a daily basis and to see what happens. But that question have not been addressed. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
thank you for a spirited lecture, as always. And there's a lot of questions and interest here. Everyone's about to go out and get remote conditioning before they exercise.
I was wondering whether the blood flow restriction is on a arterial basis or whether it's on a venous basis, because
the blood flow restriction exercise I showed you in the end. Yeah. So basically, what they do is to increase blood pressures to about 160 to 180 millimeters of mercury. So initially, it does occlude both venous outflow and arterial inflow. But because of that pressure build up, the arterial inflow will come in.
But I guess there has been some studies showing that only venous occlusion might also improve exercise capacity.
Yeah. So interesting thing about this is that even if you reduce a blood pressure, cuff pressure to, let's say, 50 or 60 millimeters of mercury. So at that pressure, arterial flow comes in, but venous flow can come out. They show the similar effect. Yeah.
Excellent presentation. Thank you. So I don't know if it's possible to go to your slides and show Barbosa's and Davis study. If you look at them, it's very interesting. We can start with Barbosa.
Which one is that?
Barbosa.
Barbosa study.
Yep, right there. Yeah.
This one.
If you see that the all difference in the left plate that shows the difference is one person who responded.
Yeah.
There were a couple of them that remained straight, and the rest of them they didn't change. And if you go to Bailey's study, that was a couple of slides before.
Slides before.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that before?
Before.
You mean after then?
I guess, no, it's the same tendency. So look
Yeah.
like you have responders and non-responders.
Are you talking about the swimming study?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's.
So if you look on Canadians, same thing. You have
Yes, sir.
responders, they're on top, and then
Yeah.
you have non-responders.
Well, no, the ones that are down are responders.
Right, so you clearly have differentiation between responders and non-responders.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for this thin edge, I guess we probably have to look on responders and see what differentiates them. Maybe it's their muscle structure, maybe it's their metabolism, maybe something else, but they're clearly differentiation. You can easily dichotomize any of the slides that you showed, whether it's John St. Michel study or Barbosa or Bailey, you have responders versus non-responders.
Yeah.
I guess if you're looking for thin edge, we need to focus on responders.
Sure. No, actually, these responders and non-responders are a very interesting issue that a lot of coaches and sports scientists are interested. Even if you prescribe just a regular standardized aerobic exercise training program, there's huge variability in terms of responses you can achieve. And there is a very famous study called the Heritage Family Study that's funded by NIH. And they did looked at the influence of genetics by studying twins and both dizygotic twins and monozygotic twins. They also studied their fathers, their grandparents, and so on and so forth. And what they found is that, well, there are about 50% genetic contributions in determining responders from non-responders. And that's probably what's shown here. Yeah.
Somebody have a question?
Yeah, no.
You had a study which showed the non-intervention the UK study showed.
Yeah.
I don't know, is there a method or is there some way of blinding which would prevent this placebo effect? That's the problem is that all of these where you don't have a placebo arm.
No. Most of them do have placebo arms. But the placebo arm consists of a pumping up blood pressure to up to about 20 millimeters of mercury. But as you know, the 20 millimeters of mercury as opposed to 200, I mean, of course, anybody can tell which one is control and which one is experimental. So it's not really true placebo that you can't hide it. Yeah.
Question back.
Yeah, nitric oxide level is kind of tricky because what many people have done is to measure nitrite and nitrate in the blood circulations, but it does affect it greatly by your dietary intake, especially the meat intake. And I went through that area long time ago because I'm presenting athletic performance, but my primary research interest is vascular health. So we go through that. So that's why we didn't really do it, because every time we try to measure it, we get criticized.
And the other question I have is, what happens to the resting heart rate on these, not necessarily athletes, but in general, when you use a schema preconditioning?
The resting heart rate doesn't change. Probably you're trying to look at involvement of a barrel reflex, maybe. Is that what you're getting at?
What about in other groups, not necessarily high performance athletes? Does the resting heart rate change on the schema preconditioning?
The acute, it doesn't change.
Yeah, experimentally, we don't see a change in heart rate.
And for runners, if you use both legs as the stimulus compared to just one,
Yes.
you get a little added effect?
Yeah, what they usually do, they put the blood pressure cuffs on both legs, and they do alternative occlusion and deflation, occlusion, deflation. That's what most people do.
And so you get an increment with it using the second leg compared to just one leg? Muscle mass is stimulus.
Yeah, actually, in terms of this Wingate test that I showed you, when we did a one-arm occlusions, it didn't have any impact. So we switched to both arm occlusions, and then we found the effect. So there might be some dose and effect relationship that not well understood in this area. Yeah.
We did that study in mice as well, but we didn't find any difference between 1 and 2 hind legs. What we found to be determinant was the number of occlusions.
Yeah.
When you go above 2 occlusions, but that's in the mice, right? In the mice model. I don't know how it is in humans, but in the mice model, when you go above 2, you find a little increase by 4, and then no further increase, and a decrement when we went up to 8.
Is there a second window? I mean, I know.
No, these were the first window, I think.
Okay, and it's lost and regained? Yeah.
Question for non-athletes, have you ever tried the RIC in non-athletes? Whether there's I presume there'd be a bigger impact.
Yeah. Yeah, many of the first studies that I showed you are done in recreationally active or physically active athletes, which is really important function. Important population to study. For example, if you look at a steroid use, we always talk about elite baseball players, NFL players, and so on and so forth. But the biggest users are gym rats. Those are physically active people in the gym. So the market is right there, and we really need to address that question. And some of the first studies I showed you are done in recreationally active or physically active athletes, and they're showing the effect as well.
The other question I have is whether this has an effect on the heart rate, long-term or short-term heart rate.
Heart rate? Yeah, I don't know. I don't think anybody has done that.
Yeah, there's no really data on this. As Hiro said, if you do a chronic ischemic conditioning, just like exercise, those athletes who have low heart rate, they've gotten it over decades and years. Maybe there would be an effect. I think based on what we heard tonight, we could summarize that ischemic conditioning exercises its effect through a multiple methods. And one was the ischemia and hypoxia. Then the other one was neuromodulation and neuromediated. Then we have possibly antiplatelet therapy that could play a role, particularly in pathologic conditions. So the question is, in a sort of 50,000 foot level for the society, not just for the clinical part, how can we translate this science to people's life? And I've been obsessed in the past couple of years in that, for decades, for century, we know that exercise improves life, improves life expectancy, it increases a number of things that physiologically are wanted. But when we look at exercise, what do we find? We find ischemic conditioning. Exercise is a not cough-based ischemic conditioning. It's an imbalance between supply and demand, which by repeating it, you do that because you run and you get tired, or you get the ischemia over the supply, you slow down, you get more perfusion, and then you do more, and you do that. So we do ischemic conditioning through exercise. And I've been thinking, what are other things that are in exercise? Obviously, burning calorie is a good benefit, but really burning calorie is the main benefit of pro-cardiovascular effect of exercise, or there are other things. And here are things that I've been really nailing down. One is ischemia and reperfusion. The other one is the shear stress that exercise creates within vasculature. And we're not talking about just aorta or femoral or big arteries, in the entire vasculatures, which is about arterial side, which is about 50% of 60,000 miles, so 30,000 miles of vasculatures that goes through an increased shear stress. And most recent tool for replicating that, you might be aware, is this counter pulsation devices that generate that kind of pulsation. So a normal heart rate is, say 70 during systole. During diastole, you create another pulse, so you just create 140 heart rate an individual on a bed. And so then comes with the neuromediated. Neuromodulation or neuromediated, if we can do this. So I have been working on building a bed that, and Dr. Yen and I have been really the past year or so heavily working on this, that could replicate the effect of exercise without running in actual physical. So it would offer ischemic conditioning in multiple limbs. It creates counter pulsation that creates the effect of shear stress here. It has a simple neuromodulation effect depending on where you use it for neurostimulation. And then the effect of vibration as a whole, which is not as well understood as counter pulsation, but it's different, the effect of vibration. There are a couple of studies saying vibration, total body vibration. You've probably seen in your gym, you get on this device called a power plate. It vibrates the whole body. They claim that it increases nitric oxide bioavailability. But my really hope is we can bring something like this to all these nursing homes and all the elderly people who are physically inactive, and give them the benefit of ischemic conditioning, shear stress modulation, neuromodulation, pretty much probably 80%. If they don't need to lose weight and lose calorie, that's probably 80% of the effect of exercise, if not more. We know that pounding on your joints and back is not the effect of exercise, not what we want. Those are adverse effects of exercise that we get. So if we can replicate the effect of exercise, I was telling Dr. Fuster that if you're working on this polypeel to bring different compounds in this, and he said, well, your device could be a mechanical polypeel, which you basically bring multiple methods that have proven science behind it. Ischemic conditioning, we now know. If we just wait for that to just come to cath lab or emergency rooms or ambulance, we're only going to touch 0.01% of the society. But if we are able to pack, again, science treatment, to something that could go to the masses. And I'm not talking about gym rats, which obviously when you have a product like this, they're the one first to go buy this and try to improve their edge. But for the elderly, for the people, for the couch potatoes, who really can't have it. So a part of this is a bed that could be in hospital or nursing home and so on, and a part of it is a portable device that they take home, put them around their arms, legs, and just press the button, and it creates ischemic conditioning alternatively, as well as pulsation. So that's what we're working at, ischemic conditioning therapeutic, along with the rest of the team in the field. And my main draw for having these meetings, which is, as I said, it's a 5th year, is to bring awareness for the entire field. This field is so forgotten. It's not even 1% of the awareness of it. When I start talking to physicians about ischemic conditioning, I always get this look that I'm talking about some weird science, whereas such an easy concept that should come to patient care and should come to wellness and so on. So Dr. Kohner has called, and I'm just going to echo what he called for, and that is the NIH needs to stand up. You know, thousands of studies have been done over decades for these interventional studies. Well, if you could just do one study, a larger study, 20,000, 30,000 patient with ischemic conditioning, such an easy concept, low cost, doesn't require a cath lab or an MRI or a huge infrastructure, and make an impact that is as shown with these studies. This is phenomenal. So we want to get our message out. As I said, most of our viewers from this meetings or these AHA meetings that we have held over years are online viewers. They look at, they go on YouTube and they see the speakers, and we put the slides over there, and we hope with this we can generate awareness. Appreciate your coming on time, and we managed our time very well. So thank you very much, and have a good evening. Thank you.